Okay, so the war in Iran. I didn't want to do it, but here I am doing it. Let's talk about it. Hi, guys. Welcome to Aldi Mastery. I'm Llewellyn Devereaux, the channel where we talk about economics, business, and progressive mindset, right? And today, we're talking about the war in Iran. Now, I don't like doing content that is, instantaneous. I like evergreen content, but I think this war is very interesting, and we need to kind of jump into a couple of things regarding it because it's going to affect us short term if it does if it ends in the short term. But if it doesn't end in the short term, it is going to affect us in the midterm and in the long term. So I think let's jump into it. Like let's really unpack this war in Iran, which is kind of deemed to be World War Three or the beginning of World War Three. And if it is the beginning of World War Three, and you're watching this, and it is World War Three, or it was World War Three a couple of years later, then here we are. But for the most part, yeah. So basically, Israel and the USA attacked Iran a week and a bit ago, and for the most part, this is now March 2026, and really, it has been a situation where Iran has obviously fired back. There's been missiles fired. A lot of places have been bombed right now. And then Iran went and retaliated and started attacking military bases, U.S. military bases. It has really been just the whole thing on its own. But now, the crazy thing right now is that Iran has been bombing Dubai, has been bombing Kuwait, has been bombing Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a whole situation going on right now in the Middle East, and flights are basically grounded. People are stranded in airports. It's a whole intercontinental problem that's being created right now. And so the question really we have to ask ourselves today is, how will this war affect us? How will it affect you? How will it affect your wallet? How will it affect your life? And I think that's what I want to jump into today. And just really just give like some thoughts about the war, just basically going forward, and just war in general for the most part. You know what I mean? But yeah, like I said, basically the USA and Israel attacked Iran. And I mean, Israel has been trying to attack Iran for a long time, because obviously they claim allegedly that Iran has obviously been funding a lot of proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas in the region, and really has been they've created a very unsafe scenario for Israel, right? And so as a result of that, Trump apparently says that him and Marco Rubio were talking about the fact that they felt as though during the negotiations between Iran, that Iran were going to attack, and so as a result of that, they sent a preemptive strike to say that they felt as though the negotiations were going downhill and Iran was going to attack. And we know that they attacked Iran a couple of months ago because they felt as though Iran had nuclear potential, right, which they kind of eliminated at the time, according to Trump's media reports. So for the most part, that's what's been happening. And so now they attacked him now because they felt negotiations were falling apart, and if they didn't attack, more Americans were going to die. That's what the media has obviously been spinning or putting out there. So for the most part, it really has been a situation, because now remember, Trump has now went and attacked Venezuela prior to this bomb. Nigeria went into Venezuela, got that president out, and his wife, got him and his wife out, and then had a regime change in Venezuela that is obviously beneficial to the U.S. and they all deposits and whatnot in Texas and whatnot. So they really got on the regime change very quickly in Venezuela. And I think that's what they were trying to do in Iran. But that has not really happened, and that has not been what's been going on, because now Iran has been back into a corner because they basically kind of changed all the leadership in Iran. They've also killed their supreme leader in Iran, and for the most part, in that scenario, now we understanding that now the Iran military, or the Iran military, they've destroyed their naval bases, they've destroyed a lot of their airstrips, they've destroyed a lot of their bases, and a lot of their missile missile launch systems, right? But what we're seeing is that the Iran military is broken up into pieces, right, so that it can still operate and function even when the leadership or at the head has been cut off. So basically, we're seeing that right now Iran has been kind of pushed into a corner, okay? And right now, they are fighting on all fronts. They're bombing everybody. And the thing about war is that it's one thing when you start attacking strategic assets, right? Strategic military assets, your naval bases, as I said, your airstrips, and those kind of things, right? But right now, what they're attacking is civilian buildings, right? You're attacking airports. And once you start doing those kind of once you start running those kind of bombing tactics right now you've brought civilians into the fray. It really becomes an all-out kind of war in the region, and that's what's kind of happening right now. Because right now, it really has now kind of brought in the GCC countries. Now the GCC countries are what they call the Gulf Cooperation Council, right, where it consists of 6 Arab countries that are obviously in the region. So it consists of the Persian Gulf, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, right? And so basically Iran is basically brought all these countries, all these Gulf GCC countries, into a situation where now they're worrying about the economy, they're worrying about the oil deposits. Because remember something that in that Gulf, in the Middle East over there, which is called the what they call the Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, right? And so I think it's a fifth of the oil deposits are kind of moving through that strait, right? And right now there's a fight in that's being ensued between Iran and the Israelis and the US to kind of take control of that route. Because once again, when oil gets choked out, or the fifth of the world's oil supply is kind of choked out in that strait, you have supply issues, you have inflation that's going to be ensued. But we'll get into that right now. But for the most part, what I want you to understand right now is the fact that Iran has been pushed into a corner. It's been pushed into a corner by USA and by Israel, and they're basically fighting for their right to exist. They're fighting for their identity. They're fighting for their right to exist. And I think, before we've known that the US went in, they attacked Afghanistan, they attacked Iraq, they attacked Venezuela, as I said right now, to get a regime change. But for the most part now, Iran is a different country, because Iran has been preparing for this war for almost 47 years, from what I've been doing in the research, right? They've been preparing for this war. They've got drone capabilities. They're able to produce those drones in a cheap way, right? They've got missiles that are hypersonic, and they've really been preparing for this war. And I think it really comes down to a situation where it's also their ability to drag other countries into the war. As I said to you, the Middle Eastern countries, the GCC countries, have constantly been living in a safety bubble where they've been paying whatever they've been paying, forming these alliances and making sure that they're safe, they're protected by the USA having all these bases. There's been NATO in the European front and whatnot. But for the most part, they're very in a precarious scenario right now, because it doesn't seem as though they can protect themselves the way that they would like to, or the way that we think that they were able to. So right now, it's a whole situation that really becomes a regional war that brings so much into that Gulf, or in the Middle East, in terms of war, but also then creates an economic ripple effect that then has effects for us as citizens in multiple countries in the short term, mid term, and the long term. Like I said, if the war ends in the next couple of days, or especially in the next 2-3 weeks, as Trump has been saying, then there's some sort of leeway. But I don't think it's going to go there, because I think that Iran is in a situation where they realize that if they surrender, and if they stop fighting, and they have a ceasefire, Israel and the USA can just attack them once again, once they've understood the fact that right now they've been weak, and they're in a situation where they might not have as much in their arsenal as they would have done before. You know what I mean? So if I were Iran, I think Iran's going to keep fighting. I think Iran's going to keep sending out the missiles. I think Iran is going to align themselves with Russia or China in this regard, because obviously Iran is sending a lot of oil to China, and I think China does not want to have that oil stop. And I think what China will do is then have a proxy war via Iran, in the same way we saw that. The USA was having a proxy war with against Russia through Ukraine, the Ukraine war, right? So that's what we're going to start seeing right now, because as it is right now, like I said, there's been flight interruptions all around. Like, Emirates, Doha is closed. Emirates, the airport in Dubai is closed, which is the biggest airport, the most busiest airport in the world, by the way. It's closed right now until the next couple of days. And so for the most part, we're seeing that it's going to be an all-out war that could potentially start World War III, because remember, these countries are all nuclear, right? They all have nuclear capacity, and it's a very precarious time right now that's happening in the Middle East. But for the most part, how does it affect us? And I just want to speak to a concept in economics that we called cost pull inflation, right? So there's two kinds of inflation. There's a thing called demand pull inflation, where what happens is that if there is a limited amount of supply of a specific good or service, right, it automatically drives up the price of it in itself, because more people want the specific commodity, the service, this product as it is. Remember, there's a time with a Prime energy drink where they choke the supply, and then as a result of that, the price went up. Even when it comes down to champagne, they keep claiming in France that there isn't enough champagne, but what I think ultimately what they're doing is that they're driving up prices by choking supply. When you choke supply, you push up demand. When you push up demand, you push up prices, and that's what it is. So that's demand pull inflation. But another thing that you get is called cost push inflation. The cost push inflation basically means when the input costs of a specific commodity are increased, in this case oil, right? When the price of oil increases, it increases the transportation costs of moving goods from one place to another. It increases shipping costs, increases fuel flight costs. So as a result of that, all the products and services in that value chain then as a result increase, because the cost of shipping them and moving them around has increased now as a result. And so as a result of this war, in terms of the oil price going up right now, so the price of Brent crude going up, the price of the price of oil and Brent crude oil going up. We've seen this process happening the last couple of days. So this is going to keep happening if the war continues. Remember, like I said to you, in the Straits of Hormuz, a fifth of the world's oil population is moving through this entire strait. And so once if Iran decides to close, I think it's also they shares that with Oman, right, one of the GCC countries. If that strait remains closed, or they do close it, a fifth of the world's oil supply is limited. If Iran keeps bombing all refineries in Saudi Arabia, all around the Gulf countries, we have a situation and a crisis when it comes down to oil. Maybe this is why the USA went in and invaded Venezuela or attacked Venezuela, because now they have access to those oil reserves in Venezuela, which are quite substantial. But for the most part, when you have cost push inflation, you have a situation where the price of oil increases, then obviously inputs increase, and as a result of that, everything in the value chain increases. But also something that's very interesting to note in economics is that we have a concept called prices being sticky downwards, which means that even if the war had stopped tomorrow or in the next couple of weeks, for the most part, after prices have increased, prices don't tend to go down. Okay, capitalism is this weird thing that we've created that's constantly wanting more money, prices constantly keep increasing. So for the most part, this is going to increase prices and keep them there. As I heard today already, there's an airliner in our country in South Africa that obviously is increasing their prices because the price of obviously jet fuel now increases. So that obviously will then temporarily, as they say, increase the price of fuel or flights. But for the most part, we know that that's not going to come down once again. So, and I think this is going to be happening in any country in the world that obviously has airlines, and the price of airlines is going to increase temporarily, as they will see. But once the war ends, if it does end, if it does end, hopefully it does, the prices aren't going to come down, because we have a thing called cost push inflation. Okay, I want you to remember that cost push inflation and the fact that prices are sticky down. So you are going to expect, what you should expect is high prices for everyday goods, groceries and whatnot. And when it comes on to shipping, also, I mean, right now it's also scary because shipping companies are also not really sure about what's going to be happening in terms of are they shipping are their ships in transit protected, in terms of flights, are they protected, is it safe, you know what I mean? So this is going to cause a lot of friction when it comes on to freight and how goods are moving from one place to another. Delivery is going to be taking longer and longer to come. So ladies, when you want to make your orders all over the world, be aware that that's going to also increase in terms of prices, right? Also, it's going to take longer for those goods to arrive to you if they're in routes that are affected by the war. Okay, so I already have a lot of friends who've been flying, and now they're stuck in certain countries, and it's a whole situation on its own. But for the most part, that's what it is. And really, what I want you to understand also is the fact that I think we're moving into, since World War II ended, we know there was the Cold War. It was really a perception and PR war between Russia, or the Soviet Union, and the USA. Whereas now, before it was about soft power. It was about diplomacy. It was about the UN. It was about institutions. It was about being diplomatic, as I said. But right now, moving into a world where it's about hard power. It's about might makes right. And I think this is the reason why countries have been investing so much into their militaries as it is. America invest, I think, over $1.5 trillion into their military annually, right? And this is what's happened in the last year or two. And it goes to show this is the might of the United States Army. But for the most part now, we've moved into a multipolar world right now where, People are now creating their own bilateral agreements. They're moving from east to west or west to east. There's a change in currencies. People now are stockpiling and trading in their own currency, whereas before people used to believe in and trade with using the US dollar, buying the dollar and then using that dollar to kind of buy whatever they wanted to buy in terms of the exchange rate, in terms of countries to facilitate trade using the US dollar. Whereas right now, with BRICS coming into the fray, with countries just deciding that the SWIFT banking system that America kind of controls in Belgium, I think is basically they can be used for sanctions, as Putin found out when he invaded Ukraine. So we're moving into a multipolar world right now where the big powers of the world, Russia, China, and the USA, basically are kind of fighting for the right to this world. And it's not even about power, money, or resources anymore. I think right now we're moving into the situation where the fight is for consciousness. The fight is for the actual soul, because attention is the currency. Attention is the currency because consciousness creates reality. And so the fight really comes down to who's going to be dictating the plays going forward, who's going to be dictating what the world is going to look like going forward, the markets in terms of the currency. This is what the wars are really coming down to. There's also rumors of religious wars that are happening. This is obviously, people are talking about what's happening in the book of Revelation, in the Bible. There's a lot of conversations regarding this war, but for the most part, what you need to know is that we've now officially moved into a very precarious time in the world, where we're moving now from a world of soft power to a world of hard power, where might makes right. And I think right now it's a very scary time, because it really just has removed all the rules of the game. All the rules have been removed of the chessboard. The UN, we've realized the UN is a big talking shop. There is no power the UN holds. We saw with the war with Palestine and Gaza, there was all they can do is condemn what's happened, but they can't really implement anything. They can't implement international law. So right now we're in a situation in the world where anything goes, anything flows. And like I said, it's about might makes right. And you're going to see big countries fighting proxy wars with other countries or via other countries. And like I said, I don't think this war is going to stop. I don't think that Iran is going to allow themselves to be back into a power and force themselves in a situation where they have to undergo a regime change that forces them to change their identity and who they are as a sovereign state. I think they're fighting for their right to exist, and I think they're also fighting their own battle that I feel like is just for themselves based upon where they see themselves. You know what I mean? I think that every country does have a right to be sovereign, but for the most part, it's going to be interesting how it all plays apart, but how it all plays going forward. But just know that as the war continues, we are going to be affected by this economically. We're going to be affected by this in terms of how we move and how our way of life is going to be affected in terms of going forward. So just be aware of the fact that pay attention to the Strait of Hormuz, pay attention to what China is going to be doing, pay attention to the GCC countries, and really make sure you do your own research. Make sure you kind of pay attention to certain, do your background, do your analysis. Don't just accept what the media is telling you. You know what I mean? Unless you can stay on the channel, we're going to be sharing more information. I'll be sharing more as I go. But for the most part, I'm hoping that we're not in World War III territory. But if it is, this would be this would be what starts World War III, because Iran has been pushed into a corner, and I think that they're not going to back down. They don't have a reason to, and I don't think that that is going to be in their best interest as a country. And I think that the USA and Israel has kind of overestimated. I think they thought this was going to be a Venezuela situation, a Venezuela operation, and it's not proving to be that right now. And I think that right now the GCC countries are also kind of been exposed, and there's also going to be a shift in wealth. There's going to be a shift in wealth. People are going to move more towards gold. I don't know what's going to happen to Bitcoin. That's going to be very precarious in itself as well, because that's very volatile at the moment right now. So we're going to see a lot of we're moving into a time right now in the next 2-3 years that is going to define basically the world that we live in for the next generation. I think that's where we are right now. But anyway, we'll leave it at that for now. Let me not get too much into. Let me not get too ahead of myself. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Till next time. Boom.